Opening the English, this move immediately challenges the center, establishing a flexible pawn structure poised for rapid development and potential queenside expansion. Securing the king's flank while preparing for queenside development, a solid foundation for central control. Developing the knight to its natural outpost reinforces control of d5 and prepares for potential central pawn expansion. Boldly seizing the center, this pawn advance immediately contests white's control and opens vital diagonal lines for the queen and bishop. Preparing a kingside fianchetto, aiming for long-term diagonal pressure and a solid pawn structure. Developing the bishop here immediately challenges white's center and eyes the d2 knight, a tactical gambit with immediate consequences. Solidifying the kingside and preparing for central pawn breaks, this bishop now eyes the d5 square. Safeguarding the monarch is paramount, initiating a standard defensive maneuver to secure the king. Challenging black's bishop's dominion, this pawn advance probes for weaknesses and potential exchanges to gain space on the queen side. Liberating the bishop's diagonal for white's queen and king's pawn advance, a slight structural concession. Doubling pawns creates an open b-file for potential pressure, but weakens the queenside pawn structure for the long haul. Aggressively grabbing central space with the pawn creates immediate tension, potentially overextending, but aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure. Initiating knight activity on the flank aims to reinforce d4, but it could become a target. Repositioning the rook to the e-file offers crucial support for the pawn's advance, simultaneously preparing for potential central pawn breakthroughs and opening lines for other pieces. Reinforcing the kingside while preparing to contest central space now feels more urgent. Solidifying central pawn presence, d6 prepares a quiet build-up for black's pieces. Asserting control over central squares, the knight boldly advances to an outpost, aiming to disrupt black's developing harmony. Expanding queenside presence offers solid defensive support and prepares a future pawn advance, subtly challenging white's central ambitions. Asserting central space is key now. White challenges black's advanced pawn and opens lines for his own attack. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside, this pawn thrust challenges white's central control and opens new avenues for black's pieces. Solidifying central pawns aims to counter black's advancing e-pawn and prepare for a potential queenside expansion. Repositioning the bishop to **bb7** secures the long diagonal and aims to pressure white's potentially vulnerable queenside pawns after the pawn structure disruption. Unlocking the queenside diagonal, this aims to reroute the queen for central pressure and potential kingside activity. Solidifying the knight's position on d7 prepares for potential. c5 advances and reinforces the central pawn structure. Unleashing a pawn storm, white sacrifices central space to ignite an assault on the black king. Guarding the kingside from potential pawn storms, this subtle defensive maneuver shores up black's king. Initiating a kingside pawn storm, though it leaves the monarch somewhat exposed. Nurturing a knight's retreat to f8 aims to reinforce the kingside and perhaps reroute for a queenside counterattack. Shifting the queen to g3 prepares a kingside pawn storm, seeking to exploit black's slightly cramped position. Rerouting the knight to a potentially more active square on f4 or e4, aiming to exploit the advanced e-pawn. Recapturing the knight on a3 abandons the kingside pawn shield and allows black to dominate the central light squares. Recentering the knight, this repositions the piece to a potentially more active square, aiming to support the e4 pawn and influence the kingside. Pushing the pawn up the flank creates immediate space and restricts black's knight, but might leave the king exposed. Unleashing the knight's potential, this knight seeks better squares, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure. This move seeks to develop the bishop to a more active diagonal, potentially targeting black's vulnerable kingside structure, while simultaneously reinforcing the kingside pawn push. Boldly challenging white's pawn chain, this move sacrifices material to seize the initiative and open critical lines. Gaining a foothold on the queen side, This bishop aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially target the weakened light squares. Unleashing the queen, black aims to challenge white's overextended kingside pawn structure and seek counterplay along the open files. Aggressively seizing central space with this pawn thrust, white seeks to disrupt black's harmonious piece development and create attacking opportunities on the kingside. Sacrificing the bishop here opens the king's sanctuary, creating a dangerous central pawn avalanche. Unlocking the kingside with aggressive pawn thrusts, aiming to exploit the exposed monarch and create mating nets. Accepting this pawn sacrifice opens lines towards black's king. Careful calculation is paramount for white to exploit the unleashed diagonals. Unleashing the pawn storm, white tiers open the king's defenses, daring black to navigate the ensuing chaos. Unleashing the queen here creates immediate attacking prospects down the g-file while threatening the bishop. Sacrificing the queen here opens critical lines towards black's compromised king. Unleashing the bishop's power, black targets the weakened light squares and aims to disrupt white's kingside ambitions. Aimed at breaking the pin and opening the f-file for attack, though it does abandon the defense of the dark squares. Opening the h-file offers attacking possibilities, but exposes the king to potential checks. Unleashing the g-file opens avenues for attack, though it weakens your king's immediate shelter. Reclaiming the knight's lost tempo now positions it for a counterthrust, aiming to dismantle the encroaching pawn structure. Unleashing the queen to disrupt the pawn wall and open lines toward the besieged king. Prioritizing king's safety, this retreats the queen to a more sheltered square, allowing for potential pawn breakthroughs later. Sacrificing the rook opens crucial attacking lines toward the enemy monarch. Reclaiming the knight offers a glimmer of counterplay, but the king's exposed position remains a significant vulnerability. Rallying the rooks to seize control of the open file, preparing a decisive attack against the exposed enemy king. Initiating a crucial rook lift to contest the open file and challenge white's advanced pawns. Unlocking the f-file opens a direct assault on the exposed black king. Sacrificing the queen in this tangled position aims to disrupt white's central dominance and open escape routes for the king. Pondering the reopened king's flank, this capture unwinds complexities, forcing immediate calculation of the ensuing exchanges. The rook's exchange simplifies the position, potentially leading to a more favorable endgame for black despite the material deficit. Opening the g-file for decisive pressure, this exchange liberates the rook and dictates the endgame's direction. A defensive maneuver, aiming to shelter the exposed monarch from the open files, a crucial step in mitigating the immediate threats. Reactivating the bishop from its inactive diagonal, aiming to bolster the queenside defenses and contest the open files. The rook's relocation aims to solidify the pawn chain and contest the open file, preparing for a defensive regroup. A desperate attempt to activate a dormant knight through a forced sequence, gambling on black's response. The king's exposed position, now devoid of protective pawns, becomes a gaping wound that white will relentlessly probe. Exploiting the open king's file, this capture offers a decisive material advantage. Sacrificing the bishop created significant long-term pressure on the king's side, and now black must contend with that ongoing threat. Reinforcing the central pawn structure, this rook maneuver prepares for a queenside invasion. Defending the rook's connection and preparing to regroup the king for potential endgame activity. Unleashing a final king hunt, this check aims to exploit the open files and the black monarch's exposed position. The black monarch, exposed and pursued, navigates a perilous dance across the board, desperately seeking sanctuary amidst the aggressive white attack. Unleashing the king seeks to exploit the open files and capture the vulnerable pieces, a bold gambit in this chaotic endgame. Exploring the weakened kingside, this knight now eyes a potential infiltration, aiming to exploit the open files and lingering threats. Unleashing the knight to g5 reclaims initiative and pins down black's king, forcing a difficult decision. Re-establishing knight mobility offers a glimmer of counterplay, challenging white's suddenly active pieces. Unleashing the knight into the center offers white a dynamic outpost and targets black's weakened pawn structure. Trading this knight offers a slight simplification, but opens the rook on the f-file for black. Clearing the central pawn offers your king breathing room and aims to activate your remaining pieces. Seizing the opened c-file now is crucial to contest white's space advantage. Establishing a formidable outpost on d5, white solidifies control of central squares and restricts black's pieces. Unlocking the bishop's diagonal activates the queenside pawns and pressures the lone knight. Unleashing the bishop to control the key d-file offers crucial support for the advancing pawns and limits black's counterplay. A strategic pawn advanced to contest control of the queenside expanse. Opening the e-file now is crucial for activating the rook and pressuring the pinned knight. Challenging the central pawns to disrupt white's bishop's influence and create queenside counterplay. Unblocking the bishop with this maneuver opens lines and offers tactical possibilities that were previously restricted.